The universe had grown accustomed to the relentless roar of destruction. Across countless star systems, the echoes of war, laser volleys tearing through void, orbital bombardments carving scars across planets, starships collapsing into superheated clouds of metal and plasma, had become the natural rhythm of existence. Civilizations rose and fell not by diplomacy, not by alliances or treaties, but by sheer force, by the terrifying will to obliterate, by the cold calculus of survival through domination. Entire empires, confident in their permanence, were toppled in moments. Worlds that had existed for millennia were reduced to rubble, their histories erased in seconds, leaving only drifting relics and ghostly memories floating silently in the vacuum. Humanity, once considered a minor player in the cosmic theater, had been overlooked for centuries. Earth, a planet of fragile continents and precarious civilizations, had seemed insignificant to the sprawling galactic powers that cataloged planets and ranked species by the size of their fleets, the potency of their weapons, and the rigidity of their empires. Humans had been dismissed as unremarkable, a species clinging to a single fragile world, untested and underestimated in the crucible of interstellar conflict. Yet, when the war erupted on a scale no one had anticipated, humanity endured. They survived attacks that should have annihilated entire colonies, outmaneuvered fleets that dwarfed their own, and learned quickly to navigate the deadly currents of a galaxy at war. The first waves of conflict were devastating. Entire fleets collided in deep space, their explosions illuminating nebulae for light years. Orbital weapons tore trenches across moons, reduced planets to molten wastelands, and shattered asteroid belts into drifting fields of jagged metal. Alien civilizations, certain in their superiority, assumed human vessels would be obliterated, yet these fragile ships persisted. Human pilots navigated fields of debris with instinctive precision, adapting in ways that defied expectation. Engineers aboard damaged vessels reconfigured failing systems in real time, turning wreckage into temporary shields and energy sources into stabilizing conduits. Strategists orchestrated fleet movements not by protocol, but by intuition honed through generations of unpredictability on Earth. Humanity's resilience was not born solely of firepower or technology, but of adaptability, ingenuity, and the refusal to yield. As the war escalated, humans learned to exploit the very chaos that threatened them. Ambushes that should have decimated their forces were turned into opportunities for counterattack. Fleets that attempted to encircle human colonies found themselves outmaneuvered by rapid improvisation and creative tactical thinking. Alien commanders who relied on overwhelming numbers and destructive superiority discovered, to their astonishment, that humans could coordinate across light years, repurpose damaged systems, and anticipate maneuvers in ways that seemed almost preternatural. Humanity had turned survival into a weapon, and the galaxy began to notice that a species once dismissed as fragile could endure where others would have perished. Even in the most desperate circumstances, humans did not succumb to panic or despair. On planets reduced to molten wastelands, engineers found ways to stabilize atmospheres and reroute failing power grids. Colonists trapped in devastated cities navigated collapsing structures using ingenuity and observation. Pilots flew through debris storms and energy surges with a combination of instinct and improvisation, while fleet commanders coordinated strikes and evasions that confounded alien expectations. Humanity had learned to turn catastrophe into advantage, transforming the deathly chaos of war into a stage for innovation and courage. The war had become more than a series of battles. It was a crucible, a test of species survival under unimaginable pressure. Humans were forced to adapt to technologies, strategies, and destructive forces far beyond anything they had ever encountered. And yet, rather than succumbing, they excelled. They combined logic with intuition, planning with improvisation, and courage with foresight. Where other species relied solely on overwhelming strength or rigid protocols, humans demonstrated creativity under pressure, collaboration across distances, and a capacity to learn from failure faster than any other species in recorded history. And then, as if the universe itself had grown tired of the endless roar of destruction, the war stopped. Across hundreds of systems, fleets froze in orbit, weapons hung suspended in mid-fire, and soldiers, alien and human alike, paused mid-action, caught in a silence that was total and profound. No communication preceded it, no ceasefire was announced, no treaties were signed. The galaxy itself had paused, holding its breath, and in that moment humans understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The universe, or the forces orchestrating its chaos, had created a space in which action rather than reaction could define outcomes. Humanity, forged by the crucible of survival, waited, not with fear, but with awareness, prepared to assert their presence in a universe that had, for the first time, truly listened. The silence stretched, immense and complete, over shattered fleets and scarred planets, over worlds trembling from centuries of conflict. Alien commanders hesitated, unsure if they could even command their ships. Fleets, poised to annihilate, remained motionless. Humans, however, did not hesitate. They had endured firestorms, maneuvered through impossible odds, and survived annihilation where no one thought they could. They knew that the next moments would define the galaxy. They knew that they had been tested, and, having endured, they were ready to respond, not with mere force, but with clarity, ingenuity, and the voice of a species that refused to be ignored. The silence that followed the sudden end of the war was absolute, stretching across light years, enveloping shattered fleets, ruined planets, and drifting debris. Alien commanders, long accustomed to issuing commands that would be executed without question, paused with unease. Their fleets, trained to respond instantaneously to threats, hung frozen in space. Weapons remained locked on targets. Energy beams flickered and dimmed mid-path, and minds, conditioned for aggression and calculation, faltered as if the universe itself had declared a temporary truce. Yet humans did not falter. They had learned to survive in the impossible, to act in moments when others would hesitate, and to exploit opportunities where chaos reigned. The silence became a canvas upon which humanity would assert its presence, not through overwhelming force, but through deliberate, reasoned, and precise communication. Humanity's first transmissions into the void were unlike anything the galaxy had experienced. They were concise, deliberate, and profoundly confident. There were no threats, no declarations of dominance, no boasts of military might. Instead, the messages spoke of existence, of intelligence, and of intention. Humanity announced its presence, affirmed its survival, and articulated a vision that demanded recognition. Every word carried the weight of centuries of adversity, the lessons learned from near extinction, and the ingenuity honed through constant adaptation. The messages were broadcast across multiple frequencies, ensuring that even the farthest fleets, drifting among the shattered remains of war, could receive them. The impact was immediate. Alien civilizations that had considered humans insignificant paused to interpret the transmissions. They had anticipated surrender, compliance, or chaos, but not reasoned clarity, not moral and strategic intent broadcast calmly across the void. Fleet commanders analyzed the signals with suspicion, expecting deception or trickery. Yet the tone was unmistakable. Humanity was neither desperate nor submissive. They were deliberate, informed, and unwavering. Their words did not carry the threat of immediate destruction, but the weight of foresight, capability, and intelligence. Every syllable was a demonstration that this was a species capable of enduring catastrophe, learning from it, and acting with deliberation. As the transmissions continued, humans articulated principles that resonated across the galaxy. They spoke of the necessity of cooperation, the preservation of life, and the importance of understanding before conflict. They emphasized that survival was not enough, that the capacity to endure, innovate, and act responsibly defined the potential of a civilization. While alien empires had relied on fear, intimidation, or overwhelming force to command obedience, humans revealed a different kind of power: the ability to command respect and attention through intellect, moral clarity, and ingenuity. The galaxy, long accustomed to noise and destruction, began to listen. Humanity did not merely communicate, they demonstrated their capability. Small fleets were dispatched to stabilize nearby systems, rescue survivors, and repair infrastructure devastated by centuries of war. Where planets had been reduced to molten wastelands, humans used adaptive engineering techniques to reconstruct energy grids, rebuild transport networks, and restore communication channels. Pilots navigated debris fields with precision, rescuing civilians trapped in unstable orbital stations. Scientists and engineers collaborated across vast distances, sharing real-time data to predict environmental hazards and mitigate further loss. Every act of ingenuity served as a live demonstration that humans were capable of more than survival. They could shape outcomes, even in the aftermath of cataclysm. Alien powers began to take note. Fleets that had poised for annihilation reconsidered their actions, realizing that humans were not acting recklessly or violently, but with foresight and intelligence. Commanders observed that human adaptability extended far beyond mere battlefield tactics. It encompassed ethics, innovation, and strategy. Humans could anticipate threats, adapt technology to new circumstances, and collaborate across massive distances with an efficiency that rivaled the most advanced species in the galaxy. Where other civilizations had relied on overwhelming force, humans relied on insight and initiative. Diplomacy, too, took on a new meaning. Humans reached out to former adversaries not with ultimatums or threats, but with reasoned proposals, emphasizing mutual survival and long-term stability. They offered assistance, shared information, and mediated conflicts where appropriate. This approach confounded those who expected human aggression. They had anticipated revenge, subjugation, or opportunism. Instead, humanity demonstrated that influence could be achieved through competence, creativity, and moral clarity rather than destruction alone. As the galaxy absorbed these unprecedented actions, a subtle shift occurred. The perception of humanity transformed from that of a fragile, insignificant species into one of respect and cautious admiration. Alien empires understood that this was a civilization capable of enduring the unthinkable, acting decisively and shaping outcomes through intelligence, foresight, and ingenuity. Humanity had survived the war, but survival alone was no longer sufficient to define their place in the cosmos. Through deliberate communication, moral reasoning, and demonstration of capability, they had begun to assert influence, reshape perceptions, and define a new paradigm for interaction across the stars. For the first time in galactic history, a species had emerged from total war not by dominating through firepower, but by demonstrating adaptability, intellect, and moral clarity. Humans had spoken, and the universe had listened. They had turned silence into a stage for demonstration, showing that a species' voice, informed by experience and intelligence, could resonate across light years and redefine relationships between civilizations. Where fleets had once clashed in fire and destruction, humanity now demonstrated that presence, Ingenuity and deliberate action carried a weight no weapon could match. The universe, still suspended in the echo of its own silence, watched as humanity transitioned from survivor to active agent. They did not rush to claim dominance, nor did they seize territories through brute force. Instead, humans began to demonstrate their power through ingenuity, adaptability, and decisiveness. Across countless star systems, where fleets had once clashed and planets had burned, humans moved deliberately to stabilize, repair, and understand. Their actions were calculated, yet flexible. Their strategy encompassed not only immediate needs, but the long-term implications of every decision. Alien civilizations observed in awe as humans rebuilt infrastructure, rescued populations, and navigated hazards that had broken other species. Where others had relied on predictable logic and rigid hierarchies, humans relied on intuition, collaboration, and the rapid application of knowledge. Human engineers reconfigured damaged ships mid-battlefields, transforming wreckage into platforms for rescue operations or energy conduits. They rerouted power from failing systems, turning vulnerability into opportunity. Pilots maneuvered fleets through unstable debris fields, asteroid clusters, and warped gravitational anomalies with a combination of instinct and improvisation that alien commanders could barely comprehend. Scientists monitored environmental hazards, calculating probabilities of collapse, radiation surges, and energy field instabilities, then disseminated solutions in real time to fleet commanders light years away. Strategists coordinated these disparate operations into cohesive, dynamic campaigns, adapting to shifting circumstances faster than any rigid alien bureaucracy could respond. Even in situations designed to trap or overwhelm them, humans found opportunity. In one sector devastated by orbital bombardment, a city-sized space station teetered on the edge of destruction. Debris from shattered satellites and destroyed defense platforms threatened to pierce its hull, while unstable energy fields from nearby wreckage created lethal corridors. Where any other species would have abandoned the station to inevitable destruction, humans did the impossible. Engineers redirected ambient energy flows to stabilize structural weak points, turning collapsing corridors into protective tunnels. Pilots guided transport pods along dynamically shifting routes, avoiding both debris and energy surges. Meanwhile, strategists monitored enemy patrol patterns and anticipated further hazards. By the time the final energy surge dissipated, the station remained intact. Civilians were rescued, and humans had mapped safe passageways through an environment previously thought impassable. What had been a death trap had become a testament to human creativity and ingenuity. As human fleets continued these operations, their reputation spread faster than any weapon could project. Alien species began to recognize a startling pattern. Humans did not merely react to threats, they anticipated, adapted, and innovated. They leveraged not only technology, but cognition, creativity, and collaboration to turn impossible circumstances into advantages. Fleets that once sought to annihilate human settlements paused to observe and learn, realizing that these humans did not operate like any species they had encountered. Humans thought not just in terms of immediate survival, but in cascading consequences and emergent solutions. Their capacity to integrate disparate information streams, innovate under pressure, and coordinate across enormous distances became the standard by which intelligence and capability were measured. Diplomatic engagements reflected the same ingenuity and foresight. Humans reached out to former adversaries, not with ultimatums or demands for subjugation, but with reasoned proposals emphasizing mutual benefit, stabilization, and shared survival. They mediated conflicts with a combination of insight, empathy, and strategic acumen, persuading former enemies to cooperate where once they would have fought. Alien leaders, many of whom had relied solely on intimidation to assert authority, were confronted with a species whose influence was derived not from fear, but from competence, clarity, and moral reasoning. In these interactions, humans demonstrated that leadership could emerge from intelligence and creativity rather than violence alone, reshaping perceptions of power across the galaxy. The consequences of humanity's approach were profound. Systems previously destabilized by war became centers of rebuilding, and trade and communication networks began to flourish under human guidance. Populations, initially wary of human intervention, began to rely on their ingenuity and resourcefulness, recognizing that survival, adaptation, and prosperity could be facilitated without coercion. Even alien commanders who had once prepared fleets to destroy human colonies began to study human methods, integrating improvisational strategies and adaptive technologies into their own doctrines. Humanity's influence was not imposed, it was earned through demonstration of capability, insight, and vision. Humanity's voice, communicated across subspace channels and through direct observation, became the measure of authority and respect. They had survived wars that had obliterated entire civilizations, endured trials that no other species could withstand, and emerged capable of shaping outcomes without reliance on intimidation or brute force. The galaxy began to understand a fundamental truth. Human ingenuity and adaptability were forces in themselves, capable of influencing events on a scale that rivaled, even exceeded, traditional metrics of power such as fleets, weapons, or territorial holdings. As humans moved forward, their approach to rebuilding, exploration, and diplomacy established a new paradigm. They demonstrated that influence could be achieved through innovation, foresight, and collaboration, that power need not be enforced but could be recognized, and that a species capable of enduring unimaginable trials could reshape the cosmos not through conquest but through wisdom, courage, and ingenuity. Alien civilizations, once dismissive, now acknowledged that humanity's presence in the galaxy could not be ignored. The war had ended, the silence had been profound, and humanity had spoken. And in speaking, they had begun to redefine what it meant to wield influence, power, and respect in a galaxy that had never known a species like them. The universe, still recovering from centuries of war, began to take note of humanity's deliberate actions. Fleets that had once poised for destruction now hesitated, not out of fear, but out of curiosity and respect. Alien empires, long accustomed to asserting dominance through force or intimidation, found themselves confronted with a species whose strength was defined not by weapons alone, but by ingenuity, adaptability, and the capacity to act decisively under the most extreme conditions. Humanity had proven that survival, creativity, and moral clarity could influence outcomes on a scale that even the most powerful civilizations could not ignore. Their presence forced the galaxy to reconsider its assumptions about power, resilience, and the true nature of intelligence. In systems devastated by the war, humans initiated reconstruction with a combination of practical engineering and strategic foresight. On a planet where centuries-old cities had been reduced to molten glass and twisted steel, human engineers worked alongside alien survivors to stabilize energy grids, restore atmospheric regulators, and rebuild transportation networks. Pilots coordinated supply drops through debris-littered skies, navigating unstable orbital fields and radiation pockets that had rendered the area inhospitable. Scientists conducted environmental analyses in real time, predicting aftershocks, volcanic eruptions, and gravitational anomalies, while fleet commanders orchestrated the safe movement of civilians and essential resources. Every step was executed with precision, yet adapted dynamically as conditions shifted, demonstrating a level of situational awareness and ingenuity that alien powers had never witnessed. The diplomatic consequences were just as profound. Formerly hostile empires approached humanity with a mix of apprehension and interest, seeking guidance, cooperation, and negotiation. Humans did not issue ultimatums or impose dominance. Instead, they engaged in dialogue with clarity and intelligence, emphasizing principles of stability, mutual benefit, and ethical consideration. They mediated disputes between alien factions, facilitated resource-sharing agreements, and created secure communication channels to prevent misunderstandings that could reignite conflict. In each interaction, humans demonstrated that influence could be wielded not through intimidation, but through competence, foresight, and moral authority. The galaxy slowly began to understand that humans had mastered a different kind of power, one that combined intelligence, ingenuity, and ethics into a force as formidable as fleets of battleships. Even those alien commanders who had once prepared to annihilate human colonies now studied their methods with fascination. Humans' approach to logistics, strategy, and improvisation revealed patterns and efficiencies previously unconsidered by any other species. Engineers learned to stabilize failing structures using ambient energy flows. Pilots mastered maneuvers that defied conventional physics, and strategists coordinated operations across multiple star systems simultaneously. Humans transformed challenges into opportunities, leveraging adversity to gain strategic advantage while minimizing harm to civilians. Where other species would have resorted to brute force or rigid protocol, humans applied creativity, collaboration, and foresight to achieve superior results. The post-war galaxy began to shift subtly in response. Trade routes once blocked by debris or hostile fleets reopened under human supervision, allowing commerce and communication to flourish. Star systems that had been abandoned became centers of recovery and innovation, showcasing human technology, coordination, and adaptability. Populations, initially wary or mistrustful, came to rely on human intervention, recognizing that their methods ensured survival, stability, and long-term prosperity. Humanity had demonstrated that its presence could be stabilizing, constructive, and transformative, earning trust even among former adversaries. Perhaps most striking was the perception change among the galaxy's most powerful empires. Those who had relied for millennia on the assertion of power through force or fear were forced to acknowledge a species whose influence derived from intelligence, strategy, and moral clarity. Humans had proven that survival alone was insufficient. The capacity to adapt, innovate, and act decisively in uncertain circumstances was what made a species truly formidable. Fleets that had once been symbols of intimidation now paused, recognizing that human ingenuity could outmaneuver even the most technologically advanced weapon systems. The galaxy's understanding of power itself had been rewritten. Humanity's influence extended beyond logistics and diplomacy. They shared knowledge of adaptive technologies, provided guidance on resource management, and demonstrated principles of cooperation that allowed alien civilizations to stabilize themselves more effectively than they could have alone. By acting as intermediaries, problem solvers, and innovators, humans were reshaping the post-war order. Alien species began to understand that influence did not require conquest or destruction. Humanity had shown that intelligence, foresight, and creativity could command respect and redefine relationships across the stars. In the end, the silence that had followed the war was no longer empty. It had become a stage upon which humans demonstrated the full scope of their capabilities. Where fleets had once clashed and civilizations had fallen, humans acted decisively, creatively, and ethically, proving that a species forged in adversity could reshape not only its own fate, but the fate of the galaxy itself. Alien commanders, diplomats, and strategists took note. Humanity was not merely a survivor of war, it was a force of ingenuity, a beacon of resilience, and a species capable of commanding influence through intelligence, collaboration, and moral clarity. The galaxy had begun to understand a new truth. True power was not measured solely in weapons or numbers, but in the capacity to endure, innovate, and act with foresight and ethical purpose. Humanity had survived the war, and in doing so, had begun to redefine the very rules by which civilizations interacted, rebuilt, and thrived. The post-war universe would never underestimate humanity again, for they had demonstrated a level of capability, adaptability, and strategic insight that even the most powerful empires had failed to anticipate. Humans had spoken through action, ingenuity, and resolve, and the galaxy had listened. As the post-war galaxy continued to stabilize, humanity's influence became unmistakable. Their voice, first heard in the silence after centuries of conflict, had grown into a force that commanded attention across systems. Humans did not wield this influence through fleets or orbital bombardments. They wielded it through ingenuity, foresight, and moral clarity. Where once empires relied on fear and brute strength to assert dominance, humans demonstrated that true authority could be earned through competence, collaboration, and the capacity to act decisively under pressure. The galaxy, long accustomed to the cacophony of war, now listened in awe to a species whose presence reshaped the rules of interaction itself. Human fleets, previously designed solely for survival and defense, became instruments of coordination and reconstruction. They facilitated the reopening of trade routes, the restoration of vital energy grids, and the stabilization of systems previously abandoned to chaos. Engineers and scientists worked tirelessly to repair orbital stations, reconstruct planetary infrastructure, and mitigate environmental hazards that had once rendered entire worlds uninhabitable. Pilots navigated debris fields and unstable gravity wells with precision, while strategists coordinated operations across dozens of star systems simultaneously, ensuring efficiency and minimizing risk. Every action demonstrated a level of adaptability and innovation that alien civilizations could not replicate, earning humanity respect far beyond what any display of firepower could achieve. Diplomatic channels, once tense and filled with suspicion, now bore witness to the influence of human reasoning. Former enemies, who had once sought humanity's destruction, now engaged in dialogue, seeking cooperation and guidance. Humans offered counsel on governance, environmental stability, and resource management, mediating disputes between alien factions and facilitating agreements that prioritized survival and prosperity over vengeance. Their approach was deliberate and measured, demonstrating that influence did not require coercion, intimidation, or conquest. It required intelligence, foresight, and the courage to act with integrity. Alien diplomats and leaders, many of whom had relied on fear to enforce authority for millennia, were forced to reevaluate their assumptions about what constituted strength. Humanity's ingenuity extended beyond technical expertise. They introduced adaptive strategies that allowed civilizations to anticipate and mitigate threats, from rogue fleets to environmental instability. They shared knowledge on harnessing chaotic energy fields, navigating gravitational anomalies, and predicting cosmic hazards, enabling species that had been on the brink of collapse to rebuild and flourish. Their guidance was not imposed, it was offered, demonstrated, and earned through trust and evidence. In doing so, humans redefined leadership in a universe accustomed to domination. Influence became a product of intelligence and creativity, not fear or coercion. Perhaps most striking was the transformation in perception among the galaxy's once dominant powers. Those who had previously relied on overwhelming fleets and destructive technologies now regarded humans with cautious respect. Fleet commanders studied human tactics, scientists analyzed human innovations, and strategists sought to emulate the flexibility and adaptability that had allowed humanity to survive and thrive. Where other species had relied on rigid hierarchies and predictable protocols, humans had demonstrated the power of initiative, collaboration, and rapid adaptation. They had turned adversity into advantage, chaos into opportunity, and survival into a platform for shaping the future. The legacy of humanity's actions extended beyond immediate reconstruction and diplomacy. By demonstrating that survival could coexist with ethical reasoning, foresight, and ingenuity, humans had reshaped the conceptual framework of galactic civilization. Power was no longer measured solely by fleets or weapons. It was measured by the capacity to endure, adapt, innovate, and influence outcomes in meaningful ways. Alien species began to recognize that humans could solve problems, mitigate conflicts, and navigate complexity in ways previously unimaginable. They had earned not just respect, but trust, and their voice had become a guiding influence in the post-war galaxy. As the centuries following the war unfolded, humanity continued to expand, not through conquest, but through exploration, collaboration, and the application of knowledge. They established research stations in hazardous regions, facilitated trade networks between previously isolated systems, and mediated disputes with a combination of insight and diplomacy that few other species could replicate. Every initiative, every successful operation reinforced the lesson that humans were a species unlike any other, resilient beyond measure, inventive beyond expectation, and morally and strategically aware in ways that commanded enduring influence. And so, the universe bore witness to a profound transformation. The silence that had followed the final battles was no longer empty. It had become a stage upon which humanity had demonstrated its full capability. The galaxy had learned a fundamental truth: to endure is not enough. One must innovate, adapt, and act with purpose. One must leverage adversity into opportunity and navigate complexity with insight. Humanity had done all this and more. They had survived annihilation, outmaneuvered expectation, and emerged as a species whose voice shaped the galaxy itself. In the end, humanity did not merely participate in the galactic order, they defined it. Their ingenuity, adaptability, and moral clarity became a benchmark for civilizations across the stars. Fleets that had once posed threats now sought guidance. Empires that had relied on intimidation now learned from human strategy. And the galaxy came to understand that a species forged in adversity and guided by intellect and integrity could wield influence more enduring than any weapon. Humans had spoken into the void, and the universe had listened. In that listening, they had secured a place not only as survivors of war, but as shapers of the galaxy's future. Humanity had endured, adapted, and risen to a level of influence that would never be questioned again.